Hi, it's Dawn Cardenas, and I'm going to talk to you today about thesis statements. And first, let's start by just looking at what a thesis statement is. It's basically a subject of an essay and a belief to be tested. And it's your opinion, it's an idea, it's a point, it's a presumption, it's your view. And if you think about all of the controversial issues that we have today in our world, there are definitely tons of opinions, and I think the people who are best at articulating their opinion are the people that will get listened to the most in the future. So, to be able to write a good thesis statement, you have to realize you have to choose a stance. You have to have an opinion on standardized tests, the 7 deadly sins, medical marijuana, obesity, prescription drugs, and the ads that they give to consumers. You ever listen to the details as they're telling you can sleep better, but then death is a consequence? Um, the right to health care, vegetarianism, social networking, is it an evil or is it a good? Insider trading by Congress, the death penalty, under God, the pledge in school, climate change, alternative energy versus fossil fuels, gay marriage, drug use in sports, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, there's so many opinions on all of these things, and in an English class, you're basically trying to formulate your opinion in the best way possible. And I love this graphic because it's exactly what you need to do when you're writing your first paragraph. You're gathering all these ideas, and that you're kind of starting out general in your first paragraph, and then at the end, you're funneling down all of that information into one thesis statement. And to a teacher, I can say I grade thousands of thesis statements. And I know for me, to read a paper without a thesis statement, it's like an endless day of gray days. It's as if I had my favorite food, and in the beginning of my career, it was really fun. And then 18 years later, when you go to read a paper and it doesn't have a thesis, and you know you've gone over thesis, it's just, after a while, it's just gray. You just realize you have to start all over. But that's my job, and I do love doing it. When you're a student and you go to write a paper and you don't think about doing a thesis statement, I equate it to it's a hard day's night and you'll be working like a dog, because if you don't have a good thesis statement, then you end up having a really hard time coming up with the details that you need to write the paper. And I can prove that to you a million times a day in my online classroom. My students, when they call for help, it's because they don't have a thesis statement. And then once we work the thesis statement, they realize, okay, now I have so many more ideas. Before you even begin to write, who's your audience? And most kids will just write the teacher. Well, how about if you're a young girl and you're talking about self-esteem and how important it is to you? Why talk to me, your teacher? Why don't you pretend your audience is a group of 12-year-old girls who look up to 16-year-old girls, or who look up to a 20-year-old girl? And if you're a young man, instead of thinking you're writing to your teacher, maybe you're writing to your best friend, or, your fan base, if you would like to call it that, your crew, your entourage. So, pick the audience correctly, because if you don't know who your audience is, it's hard to write your paper. Just like my audience on this website is so broad, and I think I'm going to narrow it down eventually, because it's easier for me to focus to one demographic, and for me, that's teenagers. So if you're watching this and you're not a teenager, it's still great information. If you're not yet a teenager, it might be too much information. So think of who your audience is. Don't breeze through that pre-writing activity. It actually is one of the most important things. And then next, you need to have a subject, which is your topic, and a verb, which is your opinion. And what I like to tell my students is the nouns paint the picture, but the verbs make the pictures move. So it's really important what nouns and verbs you pick. And also, you have to state an opinion, and you have to form an opinion. You have to state it clearly. So a lot of times, students have a hard time writing without giving their opinion. And, I don't think you should ever use I believe or I think in a paper that you're trying to prove your point. But you'll find that sometimes you can't write your ideas without first saying, well, I think this, or I believe that. So my suggestion is go ahead and get your ideas out when you're brainstorming and write with those words, I think, I believe. But then when you go into the revision process, you're going to eliminate those phrases. And you'll see that the sentence will still completely make sense. Also, don't be wishy-washy. You have to be declarative. It's necessary that you take a stance and that you are proving that stance with declarative language. So you don't want to use qualifiers such as might or maybe or perhaps. Now we're going to take a look at 2 examples, and you're going to tell me which one is a bad example, which one is a good example. Now, obviously, I want to hear your answer, but I think you'll get the point here. Number 1. LeBron James's ability to score, pass, and rebound make him the league's most valuable player. 2. Does LeBron James's ability to score, pass, and rebound make him the league's most valuable player? So, the good example is number 1. When you ask the question in number 2, you're asking for people's opinions, and you are stating your opinion. You don't really care what other people think in your paper. You're going to tell what you believe to be the truth. And we won't go in. If there were teenage kids in front of me, we'd be having a discussion now about LeBron James's recent dilemma. But we won't go there. Number 5. A good thesis statement is limited to one main idea. So what's the good example? Number 1. The key to successful dieting is focusing on a specific goal. Or number 2. The key to successful dieting is focusing on a specific goal, which is also the key to successfully running a business or coaching a sport team. What do you think? Definitely number 1 is a good example. You can't bring up all of those things in your thesis statement, although those might be ideas that you could put into your body paragraphs and make a comparison. It's a good detail, but you don't want to mention them in your thesis statement. Number 6, what I like to say to my students is anything you write is a great idea and it's going to go in the paper. You have to determine where it goes based on how important that detail is. And once you really get a good thesis statement, it's much easier to put a hierarchy together of this detail should be above this detail, etc. And last but not least, a good thesis statement is short and simple. So what's the good example here? And it's a little obvious. I mean, you could just look at the print and know the answer. But number 1, I'll read it anyway. In a world full of success gurus and books about success, it becomes ever so more important to delineate the one trait that ultimately determines success, doing the right things consistently. This is what I do when I see that kind of thesis statement. It's like blah, 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 blah. Get to the point. Number 2, success is a result of doing the right things consistently. That's the good example. And yes, the other sentence, love it. Does it need to be in the thesis statement? No. Those are all details that can go in a different paragraph. Your thesis is to the point. You're proving something. You don't want to go on and on about it. Okay, so next page is when you choose a thesis, you have to decide, am I going to be for it or against it, pro or con? And you also have to write several trial thesis statements. You can't just write your first one and think that that's going to be the right one. Even as a teacher, I have to write papers and help students write papers. And while we're going through the brainstorming process, we're both trying to think of ideas. And I don't know anybody who just writes a thesis statement perfectly the first time it comes out of their mouths, even English people. And so you need to learn as a student. I mean, of course, I'm sure that it's wrong. I tell you, I know someone who can, but what I'm saying is the average person can't just write a thesis statement perfectly the first time. So you have to realize it's a process. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to revise. And especially if you're one of my students, most people do not get through the thesis statement assignments the first time. And here's what I tell you. If you can't decide, if you're having trouble deciding which side to take on a controversial issue, write 2 thesis statements from each point of view. And then which one can you write more about? Which one can you think of more ideas? Sometimes you have to write the opposite of your opinion because you can list more facts and make a more persuasive argument, but you don't actually agree. And the pros and the cons, this was the list that I showed you in the beginning. There are so many opinions, but you might know more about why standardized testing is a bad thing because you've had a lot of experience as a student, etc. So, and I want you to know that even Disney makes mistakes in the revision process. So this is a scene from Pirates, and Johnny makes his own some of his own accessories. I heard, especially the scarves, and there's an Adidas thing in there. So that is a mistake in the editing process, in the revision process. No one caught that. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going, in my class, I have to resubmit it many times before it's the right one. And ninth graders, you're doing Romeo and Juliet. And this is the balcony scene. It's parting in such sweet sorrow that I shall say goodnight till it be morrow. And that's what the two lovers say. And in English class, in ninth grade, most students, and again, you tackle it sometimes in college, most students are required to do some type of thesis based on the play. So let's look at some of the following examples. All of the examples are based on this one question. Does Romeo's prior feelings for Rosalind diminish the credibility of his love for Juliet? So when you read the play, in the beginning of the play, you're going to see that Romeo is lusting over Rosalind, and you need to decide at some point, was when he saw Juliet, was it love at first sight? That means you believe in love at first sight if you're going to take that stance. Some people say he was wishy-washy and he was a sap. And if you believe that, you're going to take that stance. But you need to learn that there are good ways of deciding whether you're for it or against it, but a lot of students don't know and they choose both. And here I want you to pick what's the good example and what's the bad example. So number one, Romeo's prior feelings for Rosalind diminishes the credibility of his love for Juliet. So if you think that Romeo is a sap and just a romantic and he would have loved any girl who crossed his path, then that would be your statement. Or number two, this essay examines whether or not Romeo's prior feelings for Rosalind diminished his love for Juliet. So if you had to pick one where you actually had an opinion and you were trying to prove your opinion, what do you think's the right one, number one or number two? And I'll keep reading and see if you don't know yet what it is. Have you ever tried to argue both sides of anything? It's hard to argue both sides of anything. So although it's important that you acknowledge the other side and address the other position, which in high school we call that a refutation, that doesn't excuse you from choosing a side. So you have to, yes, say the statement of the obvious, but no, it should not be in your thesis statement. So the better thesis here, the good example, is the first one. It takes an opinion and it goes forward with it. Whereas this one is, well, I don't even know yet what this person thinks. I'm not quite sure. And yes, you need to have a refutation in this type of paper, but it should not be in your thesis statement. Next, let's look at the examples and then we'll go over it. Number one, Romeo loved Juliet with all his heart, but he loves Rosalind too. It could be argued they were both his favorite. Juliet was not the first woman to capture Romeo's fancy. She was, however, the one who affected him the most. So, the good example is 2. That's the one where it definitely takes the stance that it was Juliet and just Juliet that mattered. And yes, he noticed Rosalind. That's what this sentence is saying. Yes, he noticed her, but Juliet's the one who affected him the most. And last but not least, you all have your opinion, and no one's saying your opinion is right or wrong, but an immature writer will try to manipulate their reader through emotionally charged language. So if you prejudge something based on your opinion, you have to make sure that you are not using any type of manipulation to get your readers to follow your opinion. And I would like, if you recognize when it's a presidential election or any type of election and you watch television, the news does not follow this rule, and neither do the politicians. And that's, I think, why people get so confused with who to vote for, because the the pieces that they choose to put together are kind of half truths most of the time, and you can persuade people if you're good at it, anything. Hail Bob. So the example is, and I didn't even give the bad example, the good example, because I've given a ton of good examples. But I am going to tell you that if you write immature, whiny, male pig Romeo, a male harlot, ruined precious Juliet, whom he loved no more than Rosalind, that's not going to get you anywhere in an English class. Okay, so now you know what a general thesis statement is. Now we're going to take a look even more detail. And if you're in my class, you must turn in a 3-part thesis. So if your teacher requires a 3-point, and it's also known as a blueprinted thesis, then stay on. If you think you know enough about thesis, then adios. Okay. So a 3-part blueprint thesis. I pull up this iPhone image because it's October. Steve Jobs passed away this month, and there's just so much going on in the world technology-wise that I know when you think of blueprint, you may have thought of a home, a building, an architect, but a blueprint can be really anything. And a blueprint for a 3-part thesis statement basically means that you're going to have 3 ideas that you're going to prove, and one of them you'll prove in the body paragraph 1, one of them you'll prove in body paragraph 2, one of them you'll prove in body paragraph 3. You notice you've got your thesis, your introductory paragraph with your thesis at the top, and this concluding paragraph at the bottom. So you ask, why bother? Why now do I have to write a 3-part thesis statement? And number one reason, to preview for our readers the supporting points that we will introduce in our supporting paragraph. So it's a preview. The key word there is it's a preview. It tells me, the teacher, and whoever else is reading it, what they're about to read. It's just like if you walk into a theme park, before you enter each area, there's a map there, and it tells you this is what's going to be in there. And imagine if that didn't exist. Imagine if the organization on the iPhone didn't exist. There would be so much less in the world. So you have to give your audiences a preview. Simple as that. Number 2, to force ourselves to consider at the very beginning of our essay the appropriateness of the points with which we will support our thesis. So before you go and you work like a dog and you write that entire paper and you realize, and happens a million times, a lot of kids don't get the feedback that I send them to say rework your thesis. They keep writing. And I talk to them about it when they're finished, and we notice there's always like that 3rd body paragraph where they had no idea what to say because they completely ran out of ideas, or they repeat some of the things that they said in body paragraph 1 or 2, which is a big no-no. And I'm saying, if you force yourself at the beginning, before you ever write, to know I have 3 points that are valid and reasonable, then you save yourself a lot of time, especially if you're a student of mine, because I will make you go back and do it again. You will not get out of my class without it. Number 3, it's a constant reminder of what you intend to write. If you don't have that map, if you don't have that blueprint as you're writing, you're lost and you're not going to write effectively. And there are 2 ways that your thesis needs to be parallel and correct. It needs to be grammatically correct and conceptually correct. We're going to first go over grammatical parallelism. Okay, so I'll read for you. To be effective and to avoid confusing ourselves and our readers, the 3 parts of the 3-part thesis statement must be parallel in 2 distinct ways. They must be grammatically parallel. So, grammatical parallelism, it sounds big, but it's really easy. It just means that all of the parts are the same. So if we have all adjectives, we're good. If we have adjective, noun, adverb, were not so good. So you have to make sure that if you're giving 3 points, they're all equal and they're all grammatically correct. So here's an example. Napoleon's foreign policies were financial, social, and political disasters for France. So notice they're all adjectives. They're modifying the word disaster. We have financial, social, and political, all the same words, all, not the same words, all the same usage, okay? And they're all saying what kind of disaster. So this thesis is proving, this thesis is attempting to prove how there was financial, social, and political disaster in France because of Napoleon, okay? And just like if you have all adjectives, all adverbs, all nouns, you also need to be aware if you use a phrase or a clause, those all have to be the same as well. So watch how I take this same exact thesis with the same exact ideas. This time I'm using adjectives modifying the nouns disaster. In the second example, I'm using prepositional phrases instead. But notice that I haven't really changed what the thesis is. I'm still proving the same point. Napoleon's foreign policies left France in financial distress, in social chaos, and in political disarray. So this one's a little more complicated because they're prepositional phrases, and the wording is changed every time. Financial distress, social chaos, political disarray. And you're still proving that that's how Napoleon left France and how he made France a disaster. Same exact ideas from the first thesis, but now we're using prepositional phrases instead. Okay, so it has to be grammatically correct. That part's not that hard for most students. The hard part, where I catch almost, I would say, 9 out of 10, is the conceptual parallel idea. So, I need water. I'll wait. Conceptual parallelism means that the 3 parts must all be the same level of generality. So, I use really easy examples here because I want you to get how they have to be the same level of generality. So watch. A, she likes to dance, swim, and breathe. So we can't use those 3, and those aren't even really great thesis statements of trying to give you the ideas, the 3 points, more so than the actual assertion with the thesis. So breathing, of course, it's a physical activity. But it's involuntary. You can't help but breathe if you're lucky. It's essential. You have to breathe, but you don't have to dance and you don't have to swim. So you can't write a paragraph about dancing and swimming and then add in breathing at the end. It wouldn't work. The idea is there. The idea, the concept, the thought behind it is just not equal, and therefore you have a less convincing paper. Next one, and this is the one that most students do. She likes to dance, swim, and tango. And I get a paragraph about dancing, I get a paragraph about swimming, and then I get a paragraph about tango. But tango is a type of dancing, and that is subordinate or submarine under the larger category of dancer, which the sentence has already said that. You've already introduced that. So you have to say something that is the same kind of activity. It's a type of activity, but it's not specific to dancing or swimming. So it could be dance, swim, and jog or run. Okay? The last one is similar, same exact thing. She likes to dance, swim, and wade. Wade is subordinate to swim. Yes, you're in the water, but wade is laying there inactive. My favorite thing to do. So I included that. And you couldn't write an entire paragraph that has any of the same ideas that go along with a paragraph about dancing and swimming. So, grammatically parallel, conceptually parallel, and I'm not finished. The best part is yet to come. Right? Yes. Yes. Okay. Some final examples. This is actors and actions. Which of these four sentences read better? Students who studied, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to figure out how to paste this together.